Hi, everyone. I'm Henne, Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk, and this is part of our ongoing series of talks and chats online. And I'm just taking the first minute to say hello and welcome as people join us for our 1 o'clock start. I'm here this week with Theater Dybbuk artist, lighting designer, and also playwright Brandon Baruch. And Brandon, so thrilled you're here with us. We'll sort of start more formally in a minute, but just to say to everyone who's joining us, this is part of our ongoing series during this time of the pandemic to really stay engaged with the audience through chats, both with me on my own, sharing about our work and about Jewish history and about theater history, and also with our collaborators and colleagues who are doing great and important work with us and also out in the world in general. And so, Theater Dybbuk is made up of a team of people who really contribute each of their unique talents to the work. And so we think it's important for you to hear from them as well as from me. So welcome. Also this week, because Brandon and I are in discussion, although you can certainly comment and chat, please know that we won't respond in the moment and that afterwards we can respond or I can respond, but in the moment you're really bearing witness. So glad you are here. Once again, I'm Henne. I'm Artistic Director of Theater Dybbuk. And for the next half an hour or so, I will be in conversation with lighting designer, Theater Dybbuk artist, Brandon Baruch. And Brandon has worked on two of Theater Dybbuk's pieces, Lost Tribes and Hell Prepared, and also it was in process on our current piece, Breaking Protocols, which we obviously know is postponed for the time being to 2021. And so we hope to continue our collaboration there as the piece develops. And before I go into a more formal introduction, or rather than me going into a formal introduction, I'm going to turn it over to Brandon a little just to say, glad you're here with me and that we're chatting. And rather than me doing a bio, could you just share with people a little bit about your own history, what brought you to the work you do and such? I think it's good to hear from you about that.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me. This is very exciting. I don't know how weird it is to say that I started off thinking I was going to be an actor. I feel like a lot of theater people find their path starting wanting to be actors. So I went to Occidental fellow, Oxy alum, thinking I was going to study acting, which I did. But as I started to explore other disciplines, that's when I started to really fall in love with lighting design, which is something that I had figured out a little bit as a child. I forget if I told you this anecdote when we were working there, but I grew up at Temple Israel of Hollywood, and Miller Hall, before it became what it was when we did our presentation of Lost Tribes there, it was an older stage, and it had this old dimming system, and I used to sneak into the theater and play with the dimmer switches on the wall and bring the light levels up and down. And they had very basic cyc lights with burnt out gels, but I would control the different levels and look at how the colors mixed. And I think that that's probably my first experience playing with lighting. And then I would always spend my allowance money on black lights and lasers, and it's always just something I found fun. But it wasn't really till college that I started to figure out how lighting design was a storytelling or a form of storytelling. And so after school, I didn't have a real career plan. I wanted to work in theater. I knew that I graduated with a theater degree, and I would need a job of some sort, but it wasn't a plan to go into a specific discipline. Lighting design was the first job that I was offered after school. I met Jessica Henne of Evidence Room, then Bootleg Theater, when I was still in school. And I ran into her at some functions right after I graduated, and she said, "What are you doing with your life?" I said, "I don't know." And a few months later, I was designing my first real design at Bootleg Theater. So that's where it started. From there, I just kind of ran with it. I had a day job for 4 years from 2008 to 2012, but I found that the amount of time and physical energy it was taking just to show up at the office was detracting from the time I was spending working in a theater. So in 2012, I left that job and decided to support myself as a designing artist. So that's how I ended up where I am.
I love it.
Yeah.
So what I love about this story is, first of all, that one is, I think, this is common, right? We start in one place in theater, and often the entry point is acting. And then sort of as we start to understand who we are, what's important to us, where our passions are, that's our career path starts to shift. And also, I love you sharing this, like, yeah, I got a gig, and that then led to a career. I mean, yes, you talked about, your love as a kid and playing with the lights and such, and you had shared that anecdote with me, which I think is wonderful. But also this, I think sometimes, especially in theater, it's where, strategy meets opportunity, right? And sometimes one overrides the other.
I paid $500, which, at that time was huge. I couldn't believe I was making $500. It was great. And for a couple of years, that was my rate. I would do shows for 500. And let's see, I think right after school, I was subletting a friend's apartment for a little bit, which I'm sure my parents were paying for when I think about it. And, I ended up back at my parents' house for a little while. And then when I got my day job, that allowed me to move into my own apartment where I still reside years later. But yeah, I think that when I think about the direction that my career took and the direction I'm going, I realize that I've always had a difficult time choosing a goal. I feel like I'm less focused on goal and more focused on momentum, which is I need to feel like I'm heading in a direction and I don't care as much what that direction is. And that's at least how I got where I am now and where I hope to be headed one day.
Yeah.
In the future.
I mean, it's interesting because you talk about momentum, and I want to we'll return to the topic of where you might be headed one day and the pandemic, and I do want to say, though, something when you spoke about momentum got me thinking about the way in which we sort of follow the tide, right? We follow the wave. And, you've had a really diverse career. I mean, you've worked in everything from kind of immersive experiences to theater with us and a variety of other groups and performers, to new opera, to dance. And so I'm curious, I mean, this is sort of a twofold question. One is sort of, how did you get into all those areas? And then two, what's the experience like working in those different areas? How do they align and how are they differentiated? I'm curious about that a little bit from an artistic process standpoint.
Sure. I think I was fortunate very early on to get involved with some really weird stuff. And when I think about kind of formative early Brandon, I did a couple projects with Ken Rote, the director, choreographer, writer, and he really taught me a lot of what I know and how I operate today. To the extent that I grew up listening to musical theater, and I loved musical theater, and I thought that theater was Broadway, and that was fine. And then in school, we read, you read a lot of Chekhov and Ibsen, and it's good theater. It's good stuff. Fortunately, I also took some courses with Laurel Mead, who introduced us to a wider range of voices in contemporary theater, which I'm very grateful for. But working with Ken, his stuff was wacky and non-literal, and it forced me to think about what theater is in terms of how stories are told and what stories are being told, but also my approach to lighting it, because at the same time, I was doing kitchen sink plays, and a lot of realism, and I realized that realism just bored me, and that it felt very formulaic and wasn't something that I had much desire to do. So as I moved forward, I started to gravitate towards projects where I felt that lighting was a character in the piece rather than a layer of atmosphere on top of it. And I wanted to do work where the lighting didn't just tell us where we are or even what's the mood of the piece, but where it was an active participant. When I started designing dance, first of all, I pretty much just say yes to I used to say yes to anything. Now I'm a little more discerning because I have a better understanding of what types of work I'm good at, what type of work will be gratifying for me. But early on, especially, I would say yes to anything and I would figure it out. When I started doing dance, that was a fascinating time because dance lighting is, you have to be one of the dancers on the stage. You have to really move with them, and the timing and the rhythm and the shape of the lighting, it is a real presence on the stage. And I think that that's something that tracked back into all of my other work. And then I should also say, when I was, I think during my senior year of college, but certainly in the first few years after, I was fortunate enough to stage manage for Nancy Keystone in some of her workshops for the Apollo project. And so I got experience working with critical mass. And at the time, I worked with the lighting designer, Justin Townsend, who is now working on Broadway and is a spectacular artist. I really love his stuff. But he introduced me, and Nancy and that whole aesthetic introduced me to the idea of lighting instruments as objects and not just light as an invisible force in a space. And so as I started to move through my career, I started experimenting a little more with non-conventional lighting sources, things which I've obviously used in a lot of our productions, but work lights from Home Depot and bulbs and tubes, and finding that not only do they create very interesting types of light that have very specific voices to me, but also seeing the fixtures on the stage, seeing them as part of the architecture of the story, allows me to design not just with lumens, but also with physical objects. And so that type of work led me into more immersive stuff, because with immersive and environmental and site-specific work, sometimes you don't have a light grid above the stage, you don't have lighting positions, and really anything that doesn't have a proscenium. I feel like the proscenium is a contract between the audience and the production, where the audience says, we agree to not think about or acknowledge anything outside of this frame.
Right.
We're not going to look above the stage and notice that there's a bunch of heavy pipes. We're not going to look to our sides. But when you don't have a proscenium, that all bets are off. And the audience still can choose how much of the environment they want to take in. But I feel like with immersive and site-specific lighting, having the source of the lighting be a part of the architecture of the space is such an integral part of the storytelling. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be diegetic,
Right.
but having it have the appropriate flavor and kind of storytelling ability, I find is as important as the quality of the light that it creates.
Right. I mean, it's very interesting. I'm thinking about our work together, and I'm thinking about Hell Prepared, which was this experience that was, decidedly non-proscenium. We're in a 360, surrounded by, shadow behind the audience in all areas. And I remember discussions with you where it was this interesting tipping point between it kind of creating the world we're in, and also recognizing that, they can see there's a lighting instrument there, but that will disappear for them because they're in the fiction. And so as it occurred to me that as a designer, you're having to always ride this line, especially in works like that, between giving them the fiction and trusting that they will suspend disbelief as long as you create the right structures to help them have that suspension.
Yes, very true, very true. That was such a fun project. I mean, for many reasons, but just the opportunity to decide the rules of the game
Yeah.
you know, all of us, all of the designers and you and choreographer, for all of us to sit there and say, like, all right, what is the contract that we're going to make the audience sign when they sit down in this space?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think we decided early on that we were going to allow for electricity, but not showcase it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We said, all right, they're going to be hanging light bulbs in these lanterns. We're not going to try to simulate candlelight, but at the same time, we're not doing bare bulb aesthetic, because it's not, you know, we want the audience to forget that there's light bulbs in there, but we don't mind if they notice them.
Right.
And then, I mean, otherwise, yeah, that was a really austere rig, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
We had well, that's not true. There was a lot of gack behind the audience. We had a lot of fixtures to light the color of the fabric, and of course all the shadow work. But in the actual space, there was very, very little going on because, you know, practical parameters, we didn't have that much grid space, but also I didn't want the feeling of that chamber to be interrupted by a big theater rig hanging on top of us.
Yes, and for those who weren't at the show, just to give you an idea, so there was audience on two sides, but it was a kind of a 360 experience because there were curtains surrounding the audience, where, as I said, shadow work was happening behind them. And the idea is that you were in sort of a ritual space. And so even the grid we had at the top was really was wire that couldn't actually hold that much. So a lot of the lights there were 2 lights on the ground, there were hidden things, there were the light bulbs, which Brandon just described, that were sort of hidden by lanterns, but we weren't pretending that they were not electric. So I think Brandon, what you did that was really interesting was, one is you kept it lean inside the space and yet still allowed us to buy the fiction. Because also by using what to the eye appeared to be practical lights, right? Like those light bulbs, even when it was augmented, we still bought the fiction that from those lanterns, our source was coming. And you made a really interesting choice. I remember at one point when you said, we're going to save the big wow for late in the play, where suddenly we were deep in the pits of Gehenna, of hell, because this was a descent into sort of a Jewish hellish space. And you said there was a point where all of time kind of spins around and things are happening, and you had a big effect where things would spin and we would see other shadows, but you saved it. You were really careful to make sure that happened when it was emotionally needed late in the play, not when, oh, we could just do it because it's cool, we could do it anytime. You really saved it and kept it contained to that moment. And that's, I think, where the storytelling in design, which a lot of people don't always identify or think about, comes in.
I think that's a large part of my design philosophy, is carefully meting out the use of equipment and the use of spectacle. My friends and colleagues make fun of me for this because I am not shy for spectacle. My work tends to be very, very, very bright, and I don't know if you could call lighting bombastic, but I'm known for using blinders. I throw things in audiences' eyes all the time. I have been called out in the press on numerous occasions for, my favorite was just back in March, I got a review that said, I cannot recommend this play because of Brandon Baruch's painful lighting.
Congratulations.
I was thrilled. Oh my goodness. It was great because, well, in that instance, and I think in some of the work I do, I think that lighting on the audience, at the audience, in the audience is a valuable part of storytelling, because you can have a story that has very offensive language or very difficult subject matter that's very hard to watch. You can have very loud, jarring, startling sound effects. Why can't lighting also be abrasive? I think that blinding cues, giving the audience moments of physical discomfort, and yes, you have to be careful because you don't want to permanently hurt someone or injure them so badly that they can't watch the rest of the piece. But those little moments where they have to look away, I think, can be valuable in the storytelling as well. But for these moments of spectacle, it's, I've been thinking I've been thinking a lot about why theater specifically. I have one design gig coming up at the end of this month where I'm going to be lighting a film shoot for a 25 minutes dance piece. And I'm very excited because it's going to be the first time I'm working since March, and perhaps the last time I'll be working till who knows when. But getting ready to light a film shoot has got me thinking about, okay, so when I'm lighting for film, when you're working on film or TV, the camera controls the frame, and the edit controls the machinations, and you can cheat, basically. You can cheat with the camera very easily. And so if we need to cut from a moment that looks like this to a moment that looks like that, you turn off the camera, you set up all the new lights, you get stuff out of the way that you don't want there, you cut to it, and you can create beautiful visuals on camera. In theater, you don't get that luxury. Everything happens live, and I think that lighting design is a form of magic. I'm a huge fan of magic and illusions as storytelling. I'm very bored by card tricks, but card tricks that have a story, where the magician has pattern, there's character to it, and there's a real story. That kind of stuff thrills me. And so with Hell Prepared, as with a lot of the work I did, half of the excitement for the audience is not expecting. I don't want to say not knowing, because if they look behind them, they'll say, oh, there's a giant white tube directly behind my seat. I'm not trying to fool them, but I guess I'm trying to surprise them. And I find that when I'm designing that type of piece where the lighting is a character and all of the things that I've said before, that the audience starts to develop an understanding of the rules of the space and how it works. And so with Hell Prepared specifically, they understand, oh, okay, there are going to be color shifts. They can make smoke appear from underneath the guy. There's going to be shadows appearing around us. Cool. And then they let their guard down, because they think, I understand all of the tools in this toolkit, everything in this arsenal. And so then when you hit them with a new vocabulary and you bring in new fixtures, and those spiraling lights, what's fun is they were all positioned outside the space, on the other side of the fabric. So you don't see those fixtures. It's exciting. And as an audience member and as a designer, I mean, especially as an audience member, I love that moment where you're sitting in a piece of theater and something happens that you just never expected to happen. And my brain, I'm a theater artist, so of course I'm immediately going to think, how did they do that? Where did that come from? And usually I can figure out pretty quickly. If not, I have a few theories. But just that quick moment where this magic happened because you thought you understood how the design worked, and there's one more trick up their sleeve. That's something I like to do.
Well, what's really interesting is, I mean, you're really talking about story and setup and payoff and setting the rules so then you can break the rules, right? And all the ways in which an audience learns what a piece is and how it functions, and then we can upend that understanding in order to cause emotional response. And so this brings up a question for me, which is sort of the other area of your career is as a playwright. And so I'm curious if kind of what you think about in terms of, do you think that aspect has influenced the way you think about design and vice versa? Just a little of that experience of these different areas you work in and the way in which they may inform each other.
It's so fun. I've been thinking about that question to prepare for this talk. The types of plays that I write are the types of plays that I hate to design. Or at least they were for a while, and I started to break away. But around the same time that I started to break away from that, I also started bringing in other lighting designers to design my plays, because I don't want to be all the things. One of the joys of being a lighting designer is being a collaborative artist. I love creating something with other people. So as a playwright, I want to be the playwright. And I have a dear friend who directs everything I write, and I bring in other designers, and I really try to get voices in the room. Playwriting started, I mean, I studied in school and I wrote a few plays at school, one of which was selected for a playwriting festival, which was very exciting. And then I didn't really write again until 2 or 3 years out of school. I was, in my early career, I designed a lot of, I don't want to say workshops, but I think kind of vanity productions. I remember a lot of screenplays that they couldn't get produced, and so they adapted them for the stage, but not really adapting, just presented them on the stage. And I just did a lot of early stage scripts. And I would sit in these theaters and get very frustrated that I was working on these things that I didn't particularly care about, but also wondering why doesn't this work for me? And so I think inadvertently that became a bit of a playwriting intensive for me, where I developed this, I started to realize my own aesthetic by seeing things that I disagreed with in all of the work I was designing. But then when I started writing for the Hollywood Fringe Festival in 2010. And I think that the first couple, 2 or 3 things that I created were, in my mind, restoration comedy. But when I look back at these things from 10 years ago, I'm very immature, kind of, jokey, not scatological per se, but crass and crude, with the intention of being shocking and edgy and then I started to pull away from that a little bit, and I realized that when I wrote, what I tended to enjoy most was creating characters who spoke with very specific intentions and putting them in a room together. And I love speech patterns. I love noticing different people's vernaculars and how they use language. And I think that there's a musicality that some people understand that language. And Tennessee Williams, I think, is the best example of this, because Tennessee Williams, every Tennessee Williams heroine enjoys speaking. They don't speak to communicate, they speak to present. I have, some would say, atavistic. It's like, no one uses the word atavistic unless they want to use the word atavistic. And and so I think as I started leaning into, really trying to understand who people are based off how they speak, and how the choices they make in the words they use reflect the way that they think and the way that they make choices and the type of person they are, I started to really think about the musicality of language. And I know that this doesn't really dovetail with my design work, except to say that I also pay a lot of attention to the musical aspects of lighting design. And I think that rhythm and timing are the most important elements of my work, especially since I do so much work using monochrome palettes and white light, that really, that timing. So I don't know, they are, they're slightly separate disciplines that don't neatly dovetail, and the type of work that I do in one is a little different from the type of work I do in the other.
One thing I'm hearing, though, in your answer, just to reflect, is that, and I think one is, as you were saying, about rhythm and mode of expression, but or extreme of expression. But I will say, what I find working with you as a designer is that you are attuned to the emotional reality of the sequence as much as the sort of base level needs of what we need to see and understand. And I think that being attuned to the emotional reality of what's happening and where it is placed in the arc of the piece, I'm hearing reflected in the way you speak about character and the way you speak about language. And so I think that's a common thread I'm noting.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I like that. I think that any good designer should know how to read a script. I think that that's just part of the trade. But certainly being able to read a script as a playwright, and also, I dabbled I haven't directed in 5 years, and while it's something that it might be exciting to do again, it's not it's not really my forte, but being able to look at a script that I'm designing, but also read it as a playwright, I think does allow me to find find some of those emotional through lines that might not pop out immediately on the page.
Yeah. So in the last few minutes, I just want to transition to a last question, which I think is really, pressing, obviously, which is, look, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. We make live theater that, at least traditionally for us, has involved gathering people together, often in close quarters, both for rehearsal and presentation. What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? What concerns? I'm sure there are obvious concerns and not so obvious ones, as well as what are there opportunities you're sort of dreaming up because of this moment? Just, I'd love to hear any reflections on what's happening, where you're headed, what might be, that kind of thing as a lighting designer.
In the first few months of the pandemic, I spent a lot of time watching broadcasts of different theater pieces, National Theatre of London and Lincoln Center, and some bootlegs, Broadway shows, and just whatever was online. And when the curtain calls would happen, I would never skip the curtain call. I would always watch the curtain call. I have a habit of standing in the back of the theater when I'm able and taking a little iPhone clip of the curtain call at opening night of my shows. And I guess I mention all of this to say that a large group of people gathered in a space experiencing something at the same time is really an essential part of my love for theater. And it doesn't look like we're going to have that again anytime soon. So I think that as time goes by, we're going to figure out ways to do maybe some outdoor stuff, stuff where people are sitting in cars watching things. I have absolutely no interest in Zoom theater as an audience member or a maker. I'll probably be using it to do table reads of two projects that I'm writing right now. But I guess right now, I am at peace with the fact that this part of my life might be over, and I hope it isn't. But when I look at the state of the world and currently our nation's non-response to this pandemic, and I know that we can't gather in large spaces again until it's actually safe to do so. And that doesn't mean knocking the virus down. That means actually getting it under control. I've been very lucky over the last 12 years to sustain myself with this art form. And there have been moments that have been rough. I've definitely skirted along poverty. Last year was a great year for me. It's a modest income comparably, but for me, it felt quite comfortable. And I had a full year of not worrying about paying my bills and, getting food in the fridge. I don't know if that's going to exist again. And by the time that that's back, I might be too old to be able to take advantage of it. Because I might be 40 again before I have a real career. And by that point, it might not be enough to pay my dues, to really pay the bills, So I don't have a plan moving forward. I don't know how I'm going to make income. I was fortunate enough to put some money away over the last year, and I can live off that for a bit. I'm applying for all of the grants and loans. If the federal unemployment extension does happen, that will be very helpful to me. If it does not, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I will continue taking design opportunities as they are offered to me. I'm thrilled to be doing this dance project. She's a choreographer who I was with in New York in January. We were designing at we did a piece at the Alvin Ailey Dance Center. Oh. That's where I was in January, and now I'm at home. But otherwise, I don't think that lighting design is going to leave me, but I don't have a good plan. I don't think that there's a future for me right now. And that's all I got. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the honesty, and in the last minute or two of us closing out, I think this is an important part of this discussion, because here we are talking about the value of the art and the different ways of working storytelling and immersive, theater and engaging people in storytelling in this live medium, live in-person medium specifically. And at the same time, there is a real existential question on the table about the existence of the form, at least in the short term, depending on how you define short term, right?
Yeah. I'm not worried about the art form.
Right.
Theater's been around. It's the longest surviving art form, and I don't think humans are ever going to get rid of it. I think that some interesting new forms of theater will come out of this. We might discover some cool stuff that we move forward with. But theater will always be around, and I think that people crave big rooms full of people. Not theater, concerts, sports, all of that. It's the industry that I'm worried about, because the industry was already having difficulty finding financial sustainability, and so I think that plenty of people are going to want to do the art. I just don't know where the resources are going to come from, and I will gladly do gigs for $250 for the opportunity to flex my muscles, but if it gets to the point where I have to take a real job to sustain myself and I can't do both, then I can't do both.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people to register that, right, even if not if, when the form returns, as you pointed out, it always does. There was the bubonic plague and the theaters came back. There was the pandemic of 1918, the theaters came back. Like, we've been here in a way before, even though obviously the circumstances are different. But what you're talking about is big structural questions, and also, and what are the financial needs that people have to meet, that if the support isn't there, the ability to continue working in this form is going to be challenging for some people who have decided to dedicate their life to it. And some real questions have to be asked because of that. So I appreciate you bringing it up. I actually think it's one of those things that here we are having a talk about the form, and to not acknowledge what's going on in the moment and the questions that are on the table would be irresponsible. So thank you for the honesty around it.
Sure.
And selfishly, I hope we're in a room together again sooner rather than later.
Me too. I look forward to it. It's I miss the act of collaboration.
Yeah.
I miss sitting in a room. I don't miss 12-hour tech days, but but we never did that either, though. We usually did shorter.
Yeah.
Shorter, no, but yeah, I just there's that moment in a room when everyone's tired and a little cranky, and you've seen me cranky too. I don't like showing my crankiness, but sometimes but there's that moment where suddenly it clicks, and everyone in the room sees the piece at the same time.
Yeah.
And we all, oh my God, that's what it is there. And it's like a runner's second wind, where suddenly everyone in the room says, okay, we know what this is. We know what we need to do. Let's do it. And that's something that I miss a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good place to leave us, because I think it's in the spirit of what we do and how we do it. And I appreciate you taking the time today. It's always a pleasure to collaborate with you. And even though right now, we can't in the same way, even having these discussions is meaningful. So much appreciated, and good to see you and the art behind you. And thanks to everyone who's watching. This Some Form of Talk will be back in 2 weeks on Friday at 1 p.m. And other than that, look forward to being in touch in the time to come about Theater Dybbuk's work and other matters related. So Brandon, thank you so much for all you do. And thanks to everyone for watching. See you soon, hopefully. All right, bye-bye.